Hello everyone, this is Charlie from the Bloomingdale Public Library, and today we're going to be talking about the Windows 11 Task Manager. While this is intended to be a quick and brief overview, there are 2 or 3 functions in particular that I'd like to highlight that I think every Windows user should be aware of. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. What is the Task Manager? It is a Windows utility that shows the current state of the computer, including hardware performance, running processes, logged in users, and a bunch more. It also provides functions for the user to control the state of the computer, including stopping locked up applications, which is probably the big one, deciding how and when applications start, finding where a running application is installed, and again, there's a bunch more. So first things first, there are a bunch of ways to go about accessing the Task Manager, and you're going to want to be familiar with a bunch of them because odds are if you're accessing the Task Manager, it's because something isn't working, or maybe you're running very slowly. And one of those things might be the mouse, the keyboard, your touch screen, or maybe the application you're working in. So the first and probably most easiest way to go about it, if it's available to you, is to take your mouse and right click on the taskbar, and then from the menu, select Task Manager, and there you go. This is what it looks like. Another way to go about it is to hit Control-Alt-Delete, which will take you to the, I guess it's called the Control-Alt-Delete screen. Now I can't get to that while I'm recording, but I've got a screenshot here, and this is what it looks like. So you hit Control-Alt-Delete, and then you'll notice Task Manager is at the bottom of the menu. You can also click in this little field at the bottom in the taskbar that says type here to enter search. If you type Task Manager, you just start typing and it should come right up. Just click on it and that will take you there. You can also go through the Start menu, which is this little picture of a window here. If you click on that, it'll be in the app list. However, it is buried in the Windows System folder. So if you click on Windows System, you see the Task Manager, and there you go. Here is our Task Manager. Starting in the top left, we have a small little menu that I honestly forgot was there. There's not too much you can do with these menu options, but under the Options tab, we do have Always on Top. So if it's the case where you have an application hogging the focus of your display, and you're having trouble keeping focus on the Task Manager, you can choose Always on Top, and that will keep the Task Manager above the fray, give you a better chance to get your system under control. There's also, under View, we have Update Speed, and you can set this to low or paused, and that will just force the Task Manager to use less resources, which again will open other things up and maybe speed things along to help you get control of your system again. So again, that's the menu. There's not a whole lot there. Beneath that, we have our tabs, and we'll go through these one at a time, but honestly there's a lot of redundancy there, so it should go pretty quick. And the first one, which is open by default, is probably the one we'll spend the most time with, and that's the Processes tab. If you're opening the Task Manager to regain control of your system because things are running slow or freezing or not working, this is probably where you want to be. On the left side, we have the list of running processes, and if we scroll down, you see there's quite a few. Most of these are Windows processes and background processes. Generally speaking, you're going to be worried about the apps anyway. There are exceptions. On the right side, we have all the information associated with the processes, including the resources they're using. So if you know the process that is bugging out on you, all you got to do is right click on it and then choose End Task. Alternatively, with the process selected, you can go in the lower right corner and choose End Task. You also might have the option to restart. It's up to you if you want to try doing that instead. So if I right click on Firefox here, you'll notice a lot of it is grayed out. That is because Firefox has a group of sub-processes. So if we expand that, which you can do with the right mouse button and selecting Expand in the menu, or clicking on the arrow here, you see we've got all the sub-process listed. Now if we right click on one of these, you see we have full access to the menu. And there's a couple of items here worth noting. One of those is Open File Location. Usually the executable files will be somewhere in the programs files or programs files x86 folders. However, since Windows 10, more and more applications are provisioned for single users, in which case they'll be in the user's app data folders or maybe somewhere else, or maybe you chose to install somewhere on a different drive or something. In any case, if you want to find where something is executing from, if you go to Open File Location, it'll take you there. In this case, Firefox is running from the Program Files folder. Right-clicking on the process again, we also have Search Online. If you're confused as to where a process came from and what's doing, you can do a Search Online, which will conduct a Bing search in your default browser for that particular process. I'm not connected to the internet right now, but otherwise, go ahead and give it a shot and you'll see what it does. It could be useful, again, for seeing what something does and where it came from. And, if you don't know what it is, there's a chance it could be malware as well. So there you go. One other option here at the bottom here is Properties. If you click on that, that brings up a whole bunch of information here. You can go ahead and float through that on your own. I'm not going to go through that now. Of particular note, under the Details tab, you can see when something was last modified. That could be useful to know when something was installed. Also under Compatibility, if it's the case where you're having trouble running an older program, you can go ahead and check the compatibility box here and select your version of Windows. I've had this work for me like once in the last 15 years, but there you go. So that's what we can do on the processes side of things. On the other side of things, where we have the information, if you right-click on any of the headers, you can see everything that's listed and not listed. If you wanted to remove something like the status column here, which is supposed to be for showing eco mode. I don't think I've got anything running in eco mode though. If I uncheck that, it's gone. At the same time, if I right-click and select, let's say process, no, we'll do publisher. That will give you the publisher associated with that process, which could be extremely useful for figuring out what something is and what it's doing. There you go. So Firefox is from the Mozilla Corporation, LibreOffice, the Document Foundation, etc. Further down the line here, we have all of the resources and how much is being used. Now, if you don't know what's causing issues, what you can usually bet on is something taking up one of the resources. So you look at the top here, and if any of these is sitting above 90 or 95%, maybe something will even be kept at 100, that is where you can click on that header, and it will sort all the processes by how much of that resource a process is using. So in this case, the anti-malware service is using up the most memory, followed by LibreOffice and Firefox. And if that was the case, I would start shutting these down one at a time until I regain control of my system. So shutting down a process can cause system instability, but if things are locked up or slow, odds are you're already there. So what you can do is shut down a process to regain control, then maybe run a system file check, or simply restart your computer, and then you will hopefully be in a better spot to start doing some troubleshooting. So that's all I've got for the Processes tab. Next, let's go ahead and look at Performance, which is just a graphical representation of how much of a resource is being used. Maybe not quite as helpful as the Processes tab, but at the same time, sometimes there can be something gained visually that can't be discerned from as easily just with the numbers. So on the left side, you can go ahead and select each resource, and then on the right side you can see what's going on. Under GPU, we've got a bunch more graphs here. I'd be lying if I said I knew what they all meant, but at the same time, if you click on one of the graph headers, you see there's more options here as well. Again, I am not savvy as to what all these do. At the same time, you again have some more information at the bottom where you can see how old your driver is and what version you're running, and in the top right hand corner you can see the hardware associated with that resource. So that is the Performance tab. Next tab up is the App History. The App History tab can show up to a month of history for the apps that run on your computer. However, this list will probably not be comprehensive. This tab is only meant to show applications that implement the Universal Windows Platform, or UWP. In other words, store apps. So if your app is not a store app, it's not going to show up on this tab. Because many applications do not implement the UWP, nor is the UWP still in active development, I wouldn't be surprised if this tab goes away in the near future. However, in the meantime, if you do use a lot of store apps, you can see how much CPU time, network time, and other metrics have been implemented in the last month or so. We're going about a month back from the recording of this video. However, you see you can also delete the usage history to start the metrics over again. If you right click on a heading, you can add a few more columns if you like, or remove them. And again, if you click on one of the metric headers, you will sort on that metric. Easy enough. Which brings us to the next tab, which is the Startup tab. The Startup tab will show you what applications can potentially start up with your computer. You have the list of applications on the left. The publisher comes next. Then the status of whether or not these applications are enabled or disabled to start with the startup of your computer. And the last column is to show you the impact that that application has on startup regarding how much resources and potentially how much time it can stall your startup. So generally speaking, I like to disable pretty much everything that isn't a driver or an antivirus program. However, if you're using cloud syncing services or have a lot of update services, you may want to enable those. It's entirely up to you, and with the prevalence of solid-state drives, the startup has gone from a couple of minutes to a couple of seconds. So again, up to you, but I personally like to keep things running as lean as I can manage. It brings us to the next tab, which is the Users tab, and this shows resource usage by user. Generally speaking, if it's just you, you don't need to worry about this tab at all. However, if you share a computer, it might be worth noting who's on there and how much resources they're eating up. There was a time where I hopped on a computer at work and everything was slow as heck, and I go to the user tab and realize that 3 other people are logged in with like 20 Chrome tabs apiece, so I couldn't do anything until I got them to log off. If you're logged in as an admin, you can probably right click on the user and disconnect them. Otherwise, you'll have to resort to other means. So again, useful to see who else is logged into the computer. Otherwise, if you expand under the user, you can see all the processes that are running for them and how much resources they're taking up. Alright, so I've covered everything I intended to cover with regards to Task Manager basics and things I think every Windows user should know about, but we still have 2 more tabs. I'll try to cover them very briefly. However, I do not recommend experimenting with the more advanced functions of these tabs without doing some research first. So with that said, we have the Details tab, and it should look kind of similar to the Processes tab, because a lot of this information is repeated. The first 2 columns aren't in there by default, but you can select them through the column headers. So the first one will be the process name, the second one is the process ID. The PID can be useful for doing troubleshooting if you're looking through the event viewer, and you can also use it in the terminal command line as well. The status, pretty much everything will be running outside of some background processes. Username, this can be helpful with regards to knowing files, security settings, and ownership. However, that's beyond the scope of what we're talking today. Basically, you might have trouble doing anything that you are not listed as the username for. Then we have CPU usage, memory usage, and UAC virtualization, which from what I understand is for processes of older applications that have lower security restrictions. So if you enable that, it will allow a less secure process to run separated from the core processes, so it'll keep you from corrupting the system. If you right click on a process here, a lot of this should look familiar. We do have some new options. We have set priority, which if you have a process that's maybe for online gaming or streaming, you might want to set this a little bit higher, whereas something like an update service that checks for updates once a day or once a week or whatever, you might want to set to low. Again, it depends on the application, how often you use it, and what it's for. Otherwise, I generally wouldn't worry too much about goofing around with these. The next one is set affinity. This is where you can actually assign a process to a CPU core. I have never goofed around with this, nor do I recommend it. However, I'm sure there's some hardcore optimizers out there that dedicate certain CPU cores to certain kind of processes and increase their performance by 1% or whatever. Again, I would only mess around with that after doing vast amounts of research. What else we have here? Create dump file. If you're having trouble with an application, you might call for service and they would ask you to send them the dump file, and that can help them figure out what's going on when an application crashed or if it's running slow. Otherwise, I've never had a reason to do anything like that since college. And I think with that, we've explored enough of the details tab. So moving on to the services tab. Basically, services are like processes, except they're more persistent. Where processes are created and destroyed, services are always hanging around. They're just running, stopped, or suspended. You see if a service is running, it has an associated process ID, and there is a description as well. So you can start and stop a service if you like. I honestly haven't had much need to do so. Some exceptions are for the print spooler when we've had the printer hang, and to clear out bad Windows updates, you'd have to stop the Windows Update service in order to delete the folder where all of the updates are stored, which is in C, Windows, Software Distribution. So it's been a while since I've needed to do that, but this is something I have certainly done plenty of times. Otherwise, I've never had to goof around with starting and stopping services without getting explicit troubleshooting instructions to do so. Now, there are a few other options that you have with services. However, you'd have to go to this little link down here that says Open Services first. And when you click on that, it actually takes you out of the Task Manager and puts you in a Services app. It looks very similar but different to the Services tab in the Task Manager. You might notice that the description now becomes the name, and then the description in the Services app is actually very descriptive and robust and actually tells you what's going on. But here, when we right-click on a service, you have the options to start and stop, etc. But there's also a Properties option, which is where you can set some other things as well, including startup type, which there have been instances where I've had to set something from automatic to manual, and recovery as well. We once had an issue with reboot loops because the first failure would always result in restarting the computer, so we never had a chance to take a look at what was going on. So when we did get into safe mode, we changed the recovery options to stop restarting the computer, and that helped us fix what was going on. But otherwise, I've had very little reason to ever go into services, and I only recommend doing so after research or receiving troubleshooting advice. So with that, I think we can call it a day. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a good day.